In the world of musical talent, the biggest question in 2025 has been, where's Susan Boyle now? Because honestly, how can you step out of nowhere onto the Britain's Got Talent stage and take the entire world by storm with one of the greatest performances that huge stage has ever seen? And then poof, you disappear like a dream. Still, Susan didn't just sing "I Dreamed a Dream." She lived the dream, becoming a global sensation. The moment she picked up the mic and the first note of that song rang out. Overnight, she went from living a quiet life in her hometown in Scotland to being one of the most loved singers on the planet. Since that unforgettable debut, Susan has released albums, performed around the world, and inspired millions with her voice and her determination. But then the cameras turned to capture something else, another new thing. And it seemed like Susan was forgotten along with a million other things that should have remained relevant. Susan Boyle was born on April 1st in the early 1960s at a small hospital in a village in West Lothian, Scotland. She was the ninth and youngest child in a working-class family. Her mother, Bridget, was in her late 40s when she gave birth. At that time, it was very risky for someone that age to have a baby. Doctors warned her that it could be dangerous for both her and the baby. But Bridget, who was a strong believer in her faith, refused to end the pregnancy. The Boyle family lived in a small house in Blackburn. They didn't have much money, and adding another child made things even harder. From the very beginning, Susan felt like she didn't quite fit in. This feeling would follow her for many years. Susan's birth was difficult. Her mother suffered from a condition that made the birth dangerous, and Susan didn't get enough oxygen for a short time. Doctors told her parents that Susan had mild brain damage. At home, the damage was more severe. Her father Patrick had fought in the Second World War and came back deeply changed. He often seemed angry and unstable. Their home, already crowded and poor, became a place of fear. Susan sometimes became the target of her father's outbursts. She went through both physical and emotional pain. Still, Susan later said she loved her father and believed he was fighting battles inside himself that he couldn't control. But those painful memories made it hard for her to trust people later in life. School didn't offer much comfort either. That label of having a mental issue stayed with her for much of her life. At school, teachers called her a slow learner. She had trouble keeping up in class, and the teachers didn't know how to help her. Other kids made fun of her, and she often felt like she didn't belong. She was picked on every day. She had a condition called epilepsy that made her faint, and her classmates laughed at her when it happened. They called her mean names like Susie Simple and Touchy. The teachers didn't protect her. They hit her with belts. Sometimes almost every day. It was a hard and terrible time in her life. Unfortunately, it didn't get easier. When Susan was in her mid-20s, she fell in love for the first time, but her father stepped in and ended the relationship without telling her. One day, he answered the phone and told the man that Susan didn't want to speak to him. Soon after, that man had a child with someone else. Susan's heart broke. She never forgot how much it hurt. It changed how she felt about love and trust for the rest of her life. While her 8 brothers and sisters moved out and started their own lives, Susan stayed at home. She became the one who took care of her aging parents, taking care of her father until he passed away and staying to care for her mother Bridget until she passed away at the age of 91. Susan's world became very small. She didn't go out much. She didn't see many friends. She gave up her own dreams to care for her family. While her siblings built their careers and started families, Susan had not moved much. For the following years, Susan lived with a painful diagnosis, and everyone believed she had brain damage from birth. But that soon changed when she learned the real truth. Susan didn't have brain damage. She had Asperger syndrome, a kind of autism, and her intelligence was actually above average. The old idea about her had been wrong. This new truth helped everything finally make sense. Susan felt relieved, and for the first time, she saw herself clearly and without the horrible label that had painted her wrong. In the late 90s, she recorded the song "Cry Me a River" for a charity CD. Only 1,000 copies were made. A local newspaper praised her voice and called her performance heartbreaking, but almost no one outside her town heard it. The world didn't know about her gift, at least not yet. That same year, Susan used all her savings to record a demo tape. She sang "Cry Me a River" and "Killing Me Softly" with his song. She sent the tapes to music companies and television shows all across the country. No one wrote back. The tapes were never heard again. Susan was heartbroken. It felt like no one wanted to hear her voice. In the early years of the next decade, Susan's life changed again. Her beloved sister Kathleen died suddenly. She had always been Susan's biggest supporter. So, her death broke Susan's heart, and she just couldn't sing anymore. So, Susan stayed silent for 2 years. She stopped performing, stopped taking music lessons, and avoided anything that reminded her of music. Kathleen had always told her to share her voice with the world. Now both that voice and her sister's voice were gone. A few years later, Susan slowly started to sing again, but by then her life had changed. Her focus was now on caring for her mother, who was now in her late 80s and needed help every day. In their small house, Susan cooked, cleaned, and watched over Bridget. In return, Bridget kept Susan's hope alive. She always told Susan, "You have a gift and you must use it." Those words and this bond with her mother gave Susan comfort. Her mother's belief in her was the one thing that helped Susan keep dreaming even when she had almost stopped dreaming herself. She decided to take a bold step. She tried out for a television show called My Kind of People. This was her first real chance at being seen by people across the country, but she didn't make it on television. The rejection was painful, but she kept singing at home and in small local spots. She never gave up on her dream. In 2007, Susan faced another deep heartbreak. Her mother, Bridget, passed away at the age of 91. For Susan, it felt like the world ended all over again. The one person who had always been her rock was now gone. After that, Susan stopped singing. She hardly left the house for almost 2 full years. She lived in silence and sorrow. Friends and neighbors became very worried. Susan seemed to have lost all her energy and will to do anything. The dream she had held on to for so long seemed to vanish after her mother's death. The house that once had music and laughter was now filled with silence and sadness. During that time, Susan became very withdrawn. Her small home in Blackburn became her whole world. The curtains stayed closed. Neighbors rarely saw her. Days would pass without Susan speaking to anyone. Most of the time, her only company was her cat, Pebbles. She didn't go to church. She didn't go to events. She even stopped caring about how she looked. The home that had once been full of love had become a place of mourning. And it stayed like that until something inside Susan slowly started to change. Before her mother passed, Susan had made a promise that she would try to share her voice with the world. So in 2008, she decided to keep that promise. She would try out for a television show called Britain's Got Talent. At the time, she was 47 years old. She had no job. She had never performed outside of her small community, but none of that mattered. She was determined to honor her mother's wish, so she filled out the form and went to the city of Glasgow to audition. She was scared. She doubted herself, but she went anyway. Later, Susan said, "I wanted to prove to myself and to everyone else that I could do it." That promise, that one brave act, changed everything. It became the start of one of the most amazing stories in entertainment. When Susan walked onto the stage at the Clyde Auditorium in Glasgow on that day in April 2009, no one took her seriously. She was 47 years old, wearing a plain gold lace dress and had messy hair. The camera showed how people in the audience were laughing, clearly not expecting anything special from this person standing before them. The judges, Simon Cowell, Amanda Holden, and Piers Morgan, looked at each other with doubt. And when Susan said she wanted to be as famous as the singer Elaine Paige, everyone in that building was shocked. The cameras again caught people's disbelief. It felt like everyone had already decided that she would fail before she even sang a single note. Then Susan opened her mouth and sang "I Dreamed a Dream" from Les Miserables, and everything changed. The room went silent. Simon Cowell's mouth dropped open. Amanda Holden stared in amazement. Piers Morgan smiled in surprise. Within moments, the judges went from doubtful to amazed. As Susan reached the powerful part of the song, the crowd jumped to their feet. The applause was deafening. After the song ended, Amanda Holden said something that echoed around the globe. She said, "I honestly think that we were all being very silly, and I think that's the biggest wake-up call ever." People repeated her words again and again. It made the world think about how quickly we judge others. Amanda's words became part of Susan's story, a reminder that real talent doesn't need to look a certain way or be a certain age. Simon later said he had never been so surprised on the show. That performance became a huge moment. Millions of people around the world watched it online. The standing ovation that night didn't stay in the theater. By the next morning, clips of her audition were everywhere on the internet. Within 1 week, more than 25 million people had watched the video. In just 9 days, that number passed 100 million. News groups like CNN, BBC, and the New York Times talked about her. Susan's voice touched people around the world. Susan's audition became a symbol of hope and of breaking shallow rules in the world of entertainment. Susan's life changed in a single night. Famous people like Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher talked about her online. By mid-April, she was the most talked about person on social media. Her audition video was being watched more than 1 million times every hour. News shows around the world wanted to feature her. She was even invited to be on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Reporters from more than 50 countries asked for interviews. Even her small church in Blackburn, Scotland became a tourist spot. People from faraway places like Japan came to visit it. In just a few days, Susan went from a quiet life to becoming a world-famous star. She returned for the semi-finals of Britain's Got Talent in late May. This time she sang Memory from the musical Cats. She was the last act of the night, which made the wait stressful, but once she began to sing, the magic returned. The audience cheered loudly. One of the judges, Amanda Holden, said her performance was absolutely amazing. Susan got more votes than any other act that night. She proved to the world that her first audition had not been a fluke. Before the final show at the end of May, everyone thought Susan would win. Her odds were the best, and most of the people placing bets were sure she would come first. By then, her audition video had been watched nearly 200 million times. In her hometown, people gathered in pubs and community centers to cheer her on. So many people wanted to watch the final that it was streamed live online for the first time. But when the final votes were counted, the result shocked many. Out of more than 17 million people watching, only a small part voted for Susan. The dance group called Diversity won. Susan came in second. People across the world were surprised. Even in faraway countries, people were talking about the result. Susan stayed kind and respectful. She congratulated the winners on live television, saying, "The best people won." Still, many fans were heartbroken. Unknown to fans, no one was more heartbroken than Susan herself. After the show, stories began to spread that she had gotten upset backstage. Some reports said she ran down the hall yelling, "I hate this show." Others said she poured water on someone and shouted at the hotel staff. Some close to her said these stories were overblown. But it showed how much pressure she was under. A few days later, the country woke up to surprising news. Susan had been taken to a private hospital in London. This was a special clinic where celebrities and even royal family members went when they needed help. Just the night before, nearly 20 million people had watched her lose the final. It had hit her hard. She cried, shouted at producers, and fainted. Paramedics were called, and she was taken to the clinic. Doctors said she was exhausted and had an emotional breakdown. At this point, Susan's fame was huge. Her audition had become one of the most watched videos ever on the internet. Even the Prime Minister of Britain sent her good wishes, but newspapers filled their pages with rumors about her health. Some reporters even played tricks on her family to get stories. One person even pretended to want to marry her just to see how she would react. The media watchdog group in Britain stepped in. They reminded newspapers that it was against the rules to invade someone's privacy, especially when mental health was involved. This moment became a wake-up call for the media. It showed how harmful sudden fame can be. Simon Cowell, one of the judges and producers of the show, admitted things had gone too far. For the first time,